The morning it all started, I was sitting at our kitchen table in suburban Phoenix, staring at another rejection letter. The envelope was thin, which in law school application terms meant bad news. My mother walked in, still in her silk robe, coffee mug in hand, and glanced over my shoulder at the Harvard Law rejection letter spread across the wooden table. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She didn't say anything at first, just sipped her coffee and shook her head with that familiar look of disappointment I'd seen my entire life. The same look she gave me when I brought home B+ grades while Kevin brought home straight A's. The same look when I made JV soccer while Kevin was varsity captain. The same look when I got into State University while Kevin got into Yale. "Maybe it's time you faced reality, Sarah," she finally said, her voice carrying that tone of forced patience she used when she thought she was being helpful. Not everyone is cut out for the big leagues. Kevin always had that special something, that drive, that intelligence. You're perfectly fine as you are. Maybe you should consider something more realistic, like teaching or social work. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks, that burning sensation of being reduced to less than. But this time was different. This time, something inside me snapped, not in anger, but in determination. "I'm going to be a lawyer, Mom," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I'm going to be a damn good one," she laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but worse somehow. It was the laugh of someone who genuinely didn't believe what they were hearing. The laugh you give a child who says they want to be an astronaut. "Oh, honey," she said, patting my shoulder like I was 12 years old. "You've been trying for 2 years. 4 rejections from top schools. Maybe the universe is trying to tell you something. Kevin was born for this kind of thing. You're just built differently." That phrase would echo in my head for months. Built differently. As if I was some inferior model, factory seconds compared to the premium version that was my older brother. Kevin Chun was everything my parents had ever wanted in a son. At 31, he was already a junior partner at Morrison, Blake and Associates, one of Phoenix's most prestigious law firms. He drove a BMW, lived in a downtown penthouse, and had never met a challenge he couldn't conquer with his brilliant legal mind and natural charisma. Our parents treated him like visiting royalty whenever he came home for dinner. My father would pour expensive wine and ask about Kevin's latest high-profile cases. My mother would beam with pride as she served his favorite dishes, hanging on every word about his courtroom victories and professional achievements. Meanwhile, I was the perpetual work in progress, the daughter who tried hard but never quite measured up. I worked as a paralegal at a small family law firm downtown, a job my mother introduced to her friends as Sarah's little legal job, as if it were a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. But that morning, staring at that Harvard rejection letter while my mother's words hung in the air like a verdict, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to give up. I was going to find another way. The legal world in Phoenix was smaller than people realized. Everyone knew everyone, and reputations traveled fast. As a paralegal, I was invisible to most attorneys, just another support staff member who filed papers and organized case documents. But invisibility, I was about to learn, could be an advantage. I spent the next 3 months researching every law school in the country that offered evening programs or part-time options. Schools that might look beyond test scores and undergraduate GPAs to see potential and determination. I studied for the LSAT again, this time with a fierce focus that surprised even me. During lunch breaks, I'd sit in the law library downtown, watching attorneys prepare for trials. I memorized their strategies, their presentation styles, their ways of organizing evidence. I wasn't just studying law, I was studying lawyers. One afternoon, while organizing files for my boss, Attorney Maria Rodriguez, I noticed something unusual. We were handling a pro bono case for an elderly man named Frank Martinez, who was being evicted from his apartment of 40 years. The landlord claimed Frank owed back rent, but the numbers didn't add up. I spread the documents across my desk after hours, when the office was empty and quiet. The lease agreement, payment receipts, bank statements, city housing records. The more I studied them, the more a pattern emerged. The landlord had been systematically overcharging tenants, particularly elderly ones, banking on the fact that they wouldn't fight back or couldn't afford legal representation. But there was more. Cross-referencing public records, I discovered the landlord had been receiving tax incentives for maintaining affordable housing while simultaneously raising rents illegally. It wasn't just a civil matter, it was fraud. I worked until 3 in the morning, building a case file that was more comprehensive than anything I'd seen in my 2 years as a paralegal. Documentation, legal precedents, witness statements from other tenants who'd been overcharged. It was all there, laid out like a roadmap to justice. The next morning, I knocked on Maria's office door, my heart pounding. She was a tough woman, in her 50s, who'd built her practice from nothing, and she didn't suffer fools gladly. "Sarah, what's all this?" she asked, looking at the thick folder I placed on her desk. "The Martinez case," I said. "I think there's more here than we initially thought." She opened the folder and began reading. Her eyebrows raised as she flipped through the pages, her expression growing more serious with each document. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Where did you get all this?" she asked finally. "Public records, cross-referencing, pattern analysis," I replied. I spent some time connecting the dots. Maria looked at me differently than she ever had before. Not as a paralegal, but as someone who might actually understand the law. "This is exceptional work, Sarah," she said slowly. "This isn't just an eviction case anymore. This is a federal fraud investigation waiting to happen." That case became the turning point. Not just for Frank Martinez, who kept his apartment and received significant compensation, but for me. Word spread through Phoenix's legal community about the paralegal who'd uncovered a major fraud scheme. Suddenly, attorneys who'd never noticed me before were asking Maria about the young woman who'd built such an airtight case. But the real breakthrough came 6 months later, when Arizona State University's law school called. They'd heard about my work on the Martinez case through Professor David Park, who taught housing law and had been following the fraud investigation. ASU had a unique evening program for working professionals, and they were interested in students who showed practical legal experience, not just test scores. The interview was unlike anything I'd experienced. Instead of asking about my undergraduate grades or LSAT scores, Professor Park wanted to know about my approach to legal research, my understanding of housing law, and my thoughts on access to justice for low-income clients. "Tell me about the Martinez case," he said, leaning back in his chair. "How did you know to look beyond the surface?" I explained my process, how I'd learned to see patterns in documents, how I'd realized that individual cases often reflected larger systemic problems, how I believe the law should protect people, not just profits. "Most first-year law students couldn't have built a case file that comprehensive," he said when I finished. "Where did you learn to think like that?" "I learned by watching," I replied, "and by caring about the outcome." 3 weeks later, I received my acceptance letter to a SU Law School's evening program. Full scholarship based on merit and demonstrated potential. I called Maria first, then my parents. My father was cautiously pleased. "That's wonderful, Sarah. ASU has a good program." My mother's response was more measured. "Well, that's nice. Dear, it's not Harvard or Yale like Kevin, but it's something." Even in my moment of triumph, I was still being measured against my brother's achievements. But this time, instead of deflating me, it motivated me. I was going to show everyone, especially my mother, that there were different kinds of intelligence, different paths to success. Law school was brutal. Working full-time during the day and attending classes 4 nights a week left me exhausted most of the time. While my classmates were young, fresh out of college with nothing but school to focus on, I was juggling case files and legal textbooks, client meetings, and study groups. But I had something they didn't: real-world experience. When professors discussed hypothetical scenarios, I could draw on actual cases I'd worked on. When they talked about client relations, I'd already spent years watching attorneys navigate difficult conversations with desperate, frightened people. My grades reflected my dedication. I made law review in my second year, something that surprised my professors and impressed my classmates. I specialized in housing law and consumer protection, areas where I felt I could make a real difference. Kevin, meanwhile, continued his meteoric rise. He made senior associate, bought a bigger condo, and started dating a fellow attorney from a prominent Phoenix family. My parents' dinner conversations still revolved around his latest accomplishments, but now they occasionally mentioned my law school achievements as well. "Sarah's doing well in her little evening program," my mother would tell friends. Not quite the same level as Kevin's firm, of course, but she's trying hard. The real test came during my 3rd year, when I landed an internship with the Maricopa County Public Defender's Office. It was unpaid, which meant even longer hours and less sleep, but it was exactly where I wanted to be. Public defense was the opposite of Kevin's corporate law world. Instead of representing companies and wealthy individuals, I was working with people who couldn't afford attorneys. Drug charges, domestic violence cases, theft, immigration issues. The clients were scared, often desperate, and usually convinced. The system was stacked against them. My supervising attorney was Rebecca Santos, a 15-year veteran of the Public Defender's Office who'd seen every kind of case imaginable. She was known for her courtroom skills and her unwavering dedication to her clients, no matter how unpopular their cases might be. "Sarah," she told me on my first day, "public defense isn't glamorous. We don't get the recognition or the money that private attorneys get, but we get something better. We get to be the voice for people who otherwise wouldn't have one." That philosophy became my guiding principle. Every case was someone's life, someone's future, someone's family. It didn't matter if they'd made mistakes or poor choices. Everyone deserved competent legal representation. My first major case was defending a young mother named Carmen Ruiz who'd been charged with welfare fraud. The prosecution claimed she'd been working under the table while receiving government assistance, a felony that could result in prison time and permanent separation from her 2 young children. The case seemed straightforward on the surface. Carmen had been receiving aid while working occasional cleaning jobs for cash. But as I dug deeper into the case files, interviewing Carmen and investigating the circumstances, a different story emerged. Carmen had been a victim of domestic violence who'd fled an abusive relationship with her children. She was trying to rebuild her life while dealing with PTSD and the challenges of being a single mother. The cleaning jobs were sporadic, barely enough to buy food when government assistance ran short. She wasn't trying to defraud anyone. She was trying to survive. Moreover, the caseworker who'd reported Carmen had failed to inform her about programs that could have helped her transition off assistance while working. There were support systems in place specifically for domestic violence survivors that Carmen had never been told about. I spent weeks building Carmen's defense, not just on the legal merits but on the human reality of her situation. I researched domestic violence statistics, interviewed experts on trauma responses, and documented every failure in the system that had led to her charges. The day of the hearing, I walked into the courtroom with a comprehensive defense that told Carmen's complete story. Rebecca had coached me on courtroom procedure, But she'd also told me something that stuck with me. The law is about more than statutes and precedents, Sarah, she'd said. It's about justice. And sometimes justice means helping people see the humanity in situations they'd rather judge from a distance. As I stood before Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s known for her no-nonsense approach to criminal cases, I felt the weight of everything I'd learned over the past 3 years. This wasn't a practice exercise or a law school hypothetical. This was Carmen's life. Judge Morrison listened as I presented Carmen's case, explaining the circumstances that had led to the charges, the systemic failures that had contributed to her situation, and the evidence that showed her intent was survival, not fraud. I cited legal precedents, but I also painted a picture of a mother's desperation and the impossible choices she'd faced. When I finished, the courtroom was quiet. Judge Morrison looked at Carmen, then at the prosecution, then back at me. "Ms. Chun," she said, "this is exceptional advocacy for an intern. You've presented a compelling case that goes far beyond the surface charges to examine the underlying issues that brought Ms. Ruiz to this courtroom." She dismissed the charges and ordered Carmen to be connected with the support services she should have received originally. As Carmen hugged her children and thanked me through tears, I felt something I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just academic success or professional achievement. This was the feeling of using my skills to change someone's life for the better. Rebecca was waiting for me outside the courtroom, a proud smile on her face. "That was remarkable, Sarah," she said. "You have a gift for this work. Have you thought about what you want to do after graduation?" I had thought about it. I wanted to stay in public service, to keep working with clients who needed advocates, not just legal representation. But I also wanted to do something bigger, something that could address the systemic issues I kept seeing in case after case. "I want to make a difference," I told her. "Not just for individual clients, but for the system itself." She nodded thoughtfully. "There's a position opening up in the Attorney General's office next year. Consumer Protection Division. They investigate fraud, predatory lending, housing discrimination. It might be perfect for someone with your skills and passion." The seed was planted. As I finished my final year of law school, I began researching the Attorney General's office, studying their recent cases and understanding their mission. It was exactly what I'd been searching for, a way to use the law to protect people on a larger scale. Graduation day was a milestone I'd dreamed about for years. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I could see my parents in the audience. My father was beaming with pride. My mother was smiling, though I could tell she was comparing this moment to Kevin's Ivy League graduation. After the ceremony, my family gathered for dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. Kevin was there with his girlfriend, full of congratulations and big brother pride. For the first time in years, I felt like we were celebrating my achievement, not just acknowledging it. "So what's next, little sister?" Kevin asked over dessert. "Going to join a firm?" I could put in a word at Morrison Blake. The offer was generous, and 6 months earlier I might have jumped at the chance to work at his prestigious firm. But my path had become clear during my internship with Rebecca. "Actually, I'm hoping to join the Attorney General's office." Sighed. "Consumer Protection Division." My mother's smile faltered slightly. "Government work? But Sarah, that doesn't pay nearly as much as private practice." "Kevin makes more in a month than those attorneys make in a year. It's not about the money, Mom," I replied. "It's about using my skills where they can do the most good." Kevin nodded approvingly. "Public service is admirable, Sarah. Different path than mine, but important work." But I could see the disappointment in my mother's eyes. Even on my graduation day, I was making choices she couldn't understand, choices that seemed to her like settling for less than what Kevin had achieved. That disappointment would soon turn to shock when I received news that would change everything. But that night, celebrating with my family, I had no idea that my mother's words about never being like my brother were about to be proven wrong in the most dramatic way possible. The real test was just beginning. 3 months after graduation, I received a call that would change the trajectory of my entire career. I was working late at the public defender's office, where Rebecca had hired me as a staff attorney, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Sarah Chun? The voice was professional, authoritative. Yes, this is Sarah. This is Deputy Attorney General Linda Walsh from the state office. We've been following your work, particularly the Martinez housing fraud case and your recent victories in the public defender's office. We have an opening in our Consumer Protection Division that might interest you. My heart stopped. The Attorney General's office was the pinnacle of public service law in Arizona. These were the attorneys who took on major corporations, fought systemic corruption, and protected citizens on a statewide level. I'd be very interested, I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. Excellent. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Attorney General Patricia Hernandez would like to meet with you personally. Attorney General Hernandez was a legend in Arizona legal circles. The first Latina to hold the position, she'd built a reputation for fearless prosecution of white-collar crime and unwavering advocacy for consumer rights. The idea of meeting her in person was both thrilling and terrifying. The next morning, I stood outside the Attorney General's office in downtown Phoenix, wearing my best suit and carrying a briefcase full of case files and recommendations. The building was imposing, all glass and steel, with the state seal prominently displayed in the lobby. Deputy Attorney General Walsh met me at security and escorted me to the 10th floor. The offices were bustling with activity. Attorneys in sharp suits moving purposefully between conference rooms, assistants carrying stacks of legal documents, phones ringing constantly. The AG is in her office, Walsh said as we walked down a long corridor lined with portraits of previous attorneys general. She doesn't usually interview entry-level candidates personally, but your work has caught her attention. We stopped at a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Attorney General Hernandez was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 50s, with sharp eyes and an air of absolute competence. She stood up from behind a massive desk covered with case files and extended her hand. Miss Chun, I've heard impressive things about your work. Please, have a seat. I settled into a leather chair across from her desk, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. Tell me about the Martinez case, she said without preamble. Not the legal mechanics, but what drove you to dig deeper when everyone else saw it as a simple eviction matter? It was the same question Professor Park had asked during my law school interview, but this time I had 3 years of legal education and courtroom experience to draw from. I saw a pattern, I began. Individual injustices often reflect larger, systematic problems. Frank Martinez wasn't just one tenant being overcharged. He was part of a deliberate scheme to exploit vulnerable people. The law isn't just about resolving individual disputes. It's about identifying and stopping predatory behavior before it harms more victims. Attorney General Hernandez leaned back in her chair, studying me. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need in the Consumer Protection Division. We're not just prosecutors. We're preventive medicine for the legal system. She opened a folder on her desk and pulled out several documents. We're launching a major investigation into predatory lending practices targeting low-income communities across Arizona. Payday loans, title loans, rent-to-own schemes. These companies are systematically trapping people in cycles of debt, and traditional legal remedies aren't sufficient. My pulse quickened. This was exactly the kind of work I dreamed about during law school. We need attorneys who can think beyond individual cases to see larger patterns of abuse, she continued. Your background in housing law and consumer protection, combined with your investigative skills, makes you an ideal candidate for this team." "I'm very interested," I said, and meant it completely. "The position comes with significant responsibility," she warned. "You'd be working directly with federal agencies, coordinating with other state attorneys general, and potentially testifying before legislative committees. Are you prepared for that level of visibility?" I thought about my mother's words, about never being like Kevin, about being built differently. Maybe I was built differently. Maybe that was exactly what this job required. "Yes, ma'am. I'm ready." 2 weeks later, I was sworn in as an Assistant Attorney General in the Consumer Protection Division. The ceremony was small, just family and a few colleagues, but it felt monumental. I was 29 years old and had been given a platform to fight for justice on a statewide level. My parents attended the ceremony, both proud but in different ways. My father beamed throughout the oath-taking, understanding the significance of the position. My mother smiled and took pictures, but I could tell she was still processing what this meant for her perception of my career path. Kevin was there too, having taken time off from his firm to attend. After the ceremony, he pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," he said, and I could tell he meant it. "This is big. Attorney General's office is serious business." "Thanks, Kevin. That means a lot coming from you." He paused, looking thoughtful. "You know, I always envied your passion for this kind of work. Corporate law pays well, but it doesn't always feel meaningful. What you're doing matters." It was the first time my older brother had ever expressed anything resembling envy about my choices. For years, I'd been the one looking up to his achievements. Now, for a moment, the dynamic had shifted. My first assignment was to investigate a company called Quick Cash Solutions that operated payday loan stores throughout Arizona. The initial complaint had come from a single mother in Tucson who'd borrowed $200 to fix her car and found herself trapped in a cycle of fees and renewals that had cost her over $3,000 in 6 months. But as I began digging into Quick Cash Solutions, I discovered something much larger and more sinister than predatory lending. The company was part of a network of businesses that were systematically targeting military families, college students, and low-income workers with deliberately confusing loan terms designed to maximize fees and extend debt cycles indefinitely. I spent weeks traveling across Arizona, interviewing victims, collecting documentation, and building a comprehensive picture of the company's operations. What I found was breathtaking in its scope and callousness. Quick Cash Solutions wasn't just charging excessive interest rates. They were using sophisticated psychological manipulation to keep customers trapped in debt. They offered loyalty programs that encouraged repeat borrowing, sent targeted advertising to people experiencing financial emergencies, and deliberately located their stores in communities with limited banking options. Moreover, they were violating state and federal lending laws in dozens of ways, from failing to properly disclose terms to using illegal collection practices. This wasn't just bad business. It was criminal enterprise disguised as financial services. I worked 18-hour days building the case, coordinating with investigators, and preparing legal documents. Attorney General Hernandez checked on my progress regularly, offering guidance and resources as needed. "This is exceptional work, Sarah," she told me during one of our meetings. "You're not just building the case. You're documenting an entire predatory ecosystem. This could be the foundation for legislative reform." The investigation expanded to include federal partners. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Federal Trade Commission, and attorneys general from 6 other states joined our efforts as we uncovered the full scope of Quick Cash Solutions operations. I found myself coordinating conference calls with federal officials, presenting findings to legislative committees, and briefing media representatives about our investigation. The shy paralegal who'd once been invisible in Phoenix's legal community was now helping lead a multi-state investigation that could change consumer protection laws nationwide. The personal cost was significant. I worked weekends, missed family dinners, and barely had time for a social life. But every victim interview reminded me why this work mattered. These weren't just legal violations. They were real people's lives being destroyed by corporate greed. One case particularly motivated me. Maria Santos, a single mother of 3, had borrowed $500 from Quick Cash Solutions to pay for her daughter's medical bills. Through a series of renewals, fees, and penalties, that loan had grown to over $8,000. Maria was working 2 jobs just to make minimum payments and hadn't been able to pay down any principal in over a year. "I feel so stupid," she told me during our interview, tears in her eyes. "I should have known better. But when your child is sick and you don't have insurance, you'll do anything." "You're not stupid, Maria," I assured her. "You were deliberately deceived by people who designed their system to trap you. That's not your fault, it's theirs." Cases like Maria's fueled my determination to not just prosecute Quick Cash Solutions, but to build a case so comprehensive that it would serve as a warning to other predatory lenders. Meanwhile, my family was struggling to understand my new role. At Sunday dinners, my mother would ask about my work, but I could tell she was confused by the complexity and scope of what I was doing. "It sounds very complicated, dear," she'd say after I explained my latest investigative findings. "Are you sure you wouldn't be happier doing something more straightforward, like Kevin's work?" Kevin, to his credit, was fascinated by my cases. He'd ask detailed questions about investigative techniques and legal strategies, treating me as a professional equal for the first time in our relationship. "What you're doing is real law enforcement," he told me one evening. "I push papers around for corporate clients. You're actually fighting crime." But the real validation came 6 months into the investigation when Attorney General Hernandez called me into her office with news that would change everything. "Sarah, I just got off the phone with the Department of Justice," she said, her face serious. "They want to join our Quick Cash investigation and expand it into a federal RICO case." RICO cases were reserved for the most serious criminal enterprises: organized crime, major fraud schemes, systemic corruption. The fact that federal prosecutors wanted to treat Quick Cash Solutions as a criminal organization was validation of everything I'd uncovered. "They're assigning a federal prosecutor to work with us," she continued. "And they specifically requested that you be the lead state attorney on the case." I sat in stunned silence. A federal RICO case would be the kind of high-profile prosecution that defined careers. The fact that I was being asked to co-lead it at 29 years old was almost unbelievable. "This is a huge opportunity, Sarah," Attorney General Hernandez said, "but it's also enormous pressure. Federal cases operate at a different level. The scrutiny will be intense, and the opposing counsel will be some of the best defense attorneys money can buy. Are you ready for that?" I thought about all the victims I'd interviewed, all the families destroyed by predatory lending, all the times I'd been told I wasn't built for the big leagues. "Yes, ma'am, I'm ready." The announcement of the federal RICO case against Quick Cash Solutions made headlines across Arizona and attracted national attention. Suddenly, I was being interviewed by reporters, quoted in legal publications, and invited to speak at conferences about consumer protection law. My parents watched a news segment about the case, and I could see the exact moment my mother began to understand what I'd accomplished. The reporter described me as the young prosecutor who uncovered one of the largest predatory lending schemes in Arizona history, and mentioned that I was co-leading a federal investigation with potential national implications. "Is that really what you've been working on?" my mother asked after the news segment ended. "Yes, Mom, this is what I do." For the first time, I saw something new in her eyes when she looked at me. Not just pride, but respect. The same respect she'd always reserved for Kevin's achievements. Kevin called me that night, his voice full of admiration. "Sarah, I had no idea you were working on something this big. This is incredible." "Thanks, Kevin. It feels pretty surreal." "Mom called me after she saw the news," he said. She was practically speechless. "I think she's finally starting to understand what you've been building." The federal case moved quickly once the Department of Justice became involved. We had agents conducting raids, executives being arrested, and millions of dollars in assets being frozen. Quick Cash Solutions and its network of affiliated companies were shut down permanently, and we recovered over $40 million for victims. But the real victory came when Congress passed new legislation based on our investigation, strengthening consumer protection laws and closing the loopholes that had allowed predatory lenders to operate. The bill was informally called the Quick Cash Act, and I was invited to attend the signing ceremony in Washington. Standing in the White House as the president signed legislation that had grown out of my investigation was a moment I'll never forget. This was impact beyond anything I'd imagined when I was struggling to get into law school or working late nights as a paralegal. The success of the Quick Cash case opened doors I'd never expected. I was promoted to Senior Assistant Attorney General and given oversight of the entire Consumer Protection Division. Law schools began inviting me to guest lecture. Other states asked me to consult on their own predatory lending investigations. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The Arizona Bar Association announced that I'd been selected to receive their Young Lawyer Excellence Award, recognizing outstanding achievement by an attorney under 35. The award ceremony was held at the Phoenix Convention Center, with hundreds of attorneys in attendance. As I sat at the head table, waiting to be introduced, I looked out at the audience and saw my entire family in the front row. My parents were there, both dressed formally and beaming with pride. Kevin sat beside them, having flown in from a business trip to attend. Even my extended family had come, aunts and uncles and cousins who'd watched me struggle through law school and wondered if I'd ever amount to anything. But the person I was most nervous about was sitting in the back of the room. Judge Patricia Morrison, the stern judge who'd presided over my first major victory with Carmen Ruiz, had come to see me receive the award. When my name was called, I walked to the podium feeling the weight of everyone's expectations, but also the confidence that came from knowing I'd earned this moment through years of hard work and dedication. When I started law school, I began looking out at the sea of faces. People told me I wasn't built for this profession. They said I didn't have what it takes to succeed at the highest levels of the law. I paused, finding my mother's face in the crowd. Sometimes the people who doubt us aren't trying to be cruel. They're just unable to see potential that doesn't match their own definition of success. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. But I've learned that being different isn't a disadvantage. It's often exactly what the world needs. The legal profession doesn't need more people who think alike, who come from the same backgrounds, who approach problems in the same ways. It needs people who see injustice from different angles, who understand struggle from personal experience, who fight for clients others might overlook. I could see tears in my mother's eyes as I continued. The Quick Cash case succeeded, not because I was the smartest lawyer in the room, but because I understood what it meant to worry about money, to feel powerless against big institutions, to need someone in your corner who truly cares about your outcome. As I concluded my speech and the audience rose in applause, I saw Judge Morrison stand and nod approvingly. The woman who'd seen me as a nervous intern was now witnessing my recognition as one of Arizona's rising legal stars. After the ceremony, my family gathered around me with congratulations and pride that felt different than anything I'd experienced before. My father hugged me tightly, whispering how proud he was. Kevin beamed like he'd won the award himself. But it was my mother's reaction that meant the most. She took my hands in hers, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah," she said, her voice breaking, "I was so wrong about you. I spent so many years trying to make you into something you weren't, never realizing how extraordinary you already were. It was the apology I'd waited my entire life to hear, and the validation that I was exactly who I was meant to be. But even in that moment of triumph, I had no idea that the biggest test of my career was still ahead. A case that would pit me against some of the most powerful forces in Arizona and force me to risk everything I'd built for the chance to achieve justice on an unprecedented scale. The real battle was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.